34 years old, 3 young children, and a cold corpse found behind a locked bedroom door. That is how Cody Longo's story ended in February 2023 when police forced their way in to find him dead. His body simply shut down from chronic alcohol poisoning, leaving him to die alone in his bed while his wife frantically called his phone. It is a brutal end for a man who had a loving family waiting for him just outside that door. Millions knew him as the golden boy from Nick, At Night and Days of Our Lives, a talent who seemingly had it all. Yet his biggest role wasn't on screen. It was a decade-long losing battle to put down the bottle for the sake of his children. He built a resume of hits like Hollywood Heights, but he paid for it with his health, drinking until his organs simply quit. This is the unvarnished story of his collapse. He was born on March 4, 1988, in Littleton, Colorado. To the casual observer of American geography, Littleton is the quintessential suburb. Located just a few miles south of Denver, it sits in the imposing, majestic shadow of the Rocky Mountains. It is a landscape defined by its vastness and its silence. The sky in Colorado is a piercing, relentless blue. The air is thin and cold, and the western horizon is dominated by jagged peaks that serve as a constant, humbling reminder of nature's permanence. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, this region was a sanctuary for the American middle class. It was a place of manicured lawns, high-performing public schools, and a community ethos that valued stability above all else. It was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to escape the noise, the grime, and the moral chaos of the coastal cities. It was safe, it was predictable, it was quiet. It was the sort of place designed to raise children who would grow up to be accountants, engineers, or teachers, people with steady heartbeats and steady 401s. But Cody Longo was born with a spirit that seemed fundamentally, almost violently, at odds with this quietude. Born into a close-knit family with deep Italian-American roots, he inherited a cultural legacy that was distinct from the reserved nature of the Mountain West. There was an expressiveness to him, a kinetic energy that set him apart from his peers before he could even speak in full sentences. While the other boys in his neighborhood were obsessed with the Denver Broncos, spending their weekends throwing footballs in the local parks or hiking the dusty trails of the foothills, Cody was drawn to a different frequency entirely. He was tuning into an internal world of sound and emotion that only he could hear. From a startlingly young age, he exhibited the unmistakable traits of a prodigy. The term is often overused in the entertainment industry, applied loosely to any child who can hold a tune or smile on cue. But in Cody's case, prodigy was a clinical description of his cognitive abilities regarding music. The family piano was not merely a piece of furniture in the Longo household. It was an extension of Cody's own nervous system. Without a single formal lesson, without a stern teacher guiding his hands or forcing him to memorize scales and theory, Cody sat down at the keys and began to play. He possessed that rare, almost magical neurological gift known as playing by ear or absolute pitch. He could hear a complex melody on the radio, a Beatles progression, a Billy Joel ballad, or a complex pop anthem, and his brain would instantly deconstruct the mathematics of the sound. His fingers would find the corresponding notes on the keys instinctively. It was as if music was his first language, a tongue he had known before birth, and English was merely a second, clumsier language he used to communicate with the mundane world around him. This was not just a parlor trick to impress relatives at holiday gatherings. It was a signal. It was an indication of a brain that was wired for high-level pattern recognition and deep, resonant emotional processing. It suggested a sensitivity to the world that was far more acute than that of the average child. And as is so often the case with artistic prodigies, this sensitivity was a double-edged sword. The same open channel that allowed the music to flow in would eventually allow the pain and the anxiety to flood in with equal force. Throughout his childhood and adolescence in the hallways of his Colorado schools, this artistic drive consumed him. He wasn't just a musician, he was a performer in search of a stage. He acted in local theater productions, throwing himself into roles with an intensity that often unsettled his peers. He danced with a natural rhythm that couldn't be taught. He wrote poetry. In the cafeterias and classrooms of his high school, he carried himself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, the specific, forgivable confidence of a big fish who knows with absolute certainty that he is swimming in a pond that is far too small for his ambitions. By the time he graduated from high school in 2006, the confines of Colorado felt suffocating. The mountains were beautiful, yes, but to Cody, they looked less like a backdrop and more like a wall blocking him from his destiny. He had the looks, symmetrical features, olive skin, and eyes that could shift from soulful to intense in a blink. He had the talent. And he had the hunger. He had to go west. Cody Longo did not initially run away to join the circus. He was not a reckless runaway. He attempted at first to follow the traditional path of the high achiever. He moved to California, but his destination was the hallowed halls of academia. He enrolled at the University of California, Los Angeles. His chosen majors, psychology and film, offer a fascinating, almost heartbreaking window into his mindset at the time. He wasn't just interested in being seen, he was interested in understanding. He wanted to know what made people tick and how to capture that human experience within a narrative frame. It was a mature, intellectual approach to the arts. It suggested a young man who wanted to build a foundation, who wanted to have a backup plan, who respected the craft. But Los Angeles, in the late 2000s, was a siren song that was impossible to ignore. It made sitting in a lecture hall feel like a profound waste of time. We must remember the specific cultural context of this era. It was 2008 and 2009. The iPhone had just been released, but the world was not yet enslaved by social media algorithms. Instagram did not exist. TikTok was a decade away. The influencer economy had not yet been invented. Fame was not something you could manufacture in your bedroom with a ring light and a viral dance trend. In 2009, if you wanted to be famous, you had to be chosen. You had to be on television. You had to be in movies. The gatekeepers, casting directors, agents, producers, studio executives still held all the keys to the kingdom, and the industry was hungry. The late 2000s saw the explosion of the teen genre. Networks like the CW, ABC family, and Nickelodeon were locked in an arms race to find the next generation of stars. They needed young men who fit very specific archetypes: the bad boy with a heart of gold, the tortured artist, the misunderstood jock. They needed faces that could sell magazines and break hearts. Cody Longo walked into this environment like a man who'd been built in a laboratory to satisfy this exact demand. The academic life at UCLA couldn't compete with the adrenaline of the audition room. The theoretical study of film paled in comparison to the opportunity to actually be in one. The feedback loop was instant and intoxicating. Agents saw him and saw dollar signs. Casting directors saw him and saw ratings. Producers saw him and saw a franchise. So Cody made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He dropped out. He left the safety net of the university degree, the structured path of the scholar, to throw himself into the grinder of Hollywood. It is a gamble that destroys thousands of young people every year, leaving them waiting tables on Sunset Boulevard, and nursing broken hearts. But for Cody Longo, the gamble paid off with terrifying speed. His rise wasn't a slow, steady climb, it was a vertical ascent. His first significant break came in 2009, and it was the perfect vehicle for his specific set of talents. He was cast in the ABC family drama Make It or Break It. The show was a high-stakes melodrama set in the hermetically sealed world of elite gymnastics. It was Gossip Girl meets the Olympics. It was a show about obsession, perfectionism, disordered eating, and the immense physical toll of ambition. Cody was cast as Nicky Russo. Nicky was a character that could have been a forgettable cliché in lesser hands. He was the bad boy gymnast, the outsider who didn't play by the rules, the romantic interest who offered a dangerous alternative to the disciplined, rigid lives of the female leads. But Cody brought a texture to the role that elevated it beyond the script. He brought a physical grace to the character, likely aided by his innate musical rhythm, that made the gymnastics scenes believable. But more importantly, he brought a brooding, soulful quality to the dramatic scenes. When he looked at the camera, there was a weight behind his eyes. He wasn't just reciting lines, he was emoting. He made the audience believe that Nicky Russo had a soul. The audience response was instantaneous and fervent. The fan forums of 2009, places like LiveJournal and Tumblr, lit up with discussions about the new guy. Teen magazines like J14 and Tiger Beat began to run features on him. He was pinned up in lockers across America. He was becoming a commodity. This success led to a flurry of work. The industry, sensing a rising star, tried to slot him into as many projects as possible, maximizing his visibility while his heat was high. He was cast in the 2009 remake of Fame. This was a high-pressure gig. The original Fame was a cultural touchstone. The remake was a glossy attempt to update the gritty story of a performing arts high school for the High School Musical generation. While the film itself struggled to find critical acclaim, Cody's presence in it confirmed his status as a triple threat. He played Andy Matthews, a character that allowed him to showcase his acting and his musicianship. He proved he could hold the screen in a feature film, standing shoulder to shoulder with other rising talents. He then starred in Bring It On, Fight to the Finish, alongside Christina Milian. The Bring It On franchise was a juggernaut of the teen market, a direct-to-video empire that printed money. By stepping into the role of the male lead, Cody was cementing his status as a staple of the genre. He was handsome, he could move, he had chemistry with his co-stars, and he hit his marks. But Cody refused to be pigeonholed as just another teen idol. In 2010, he fought for a role in the stoner comedy High School. It wasn't the genre that mattered, but the company he kept. He found himself sharing the screen with Academy Award winner Adrien Brody. Holding his own against an actor of Brody's caliber required more than just a smile. It required timing, improvisation, and nerve. Cody had all three. Critics who usually dismissed teen stars were forced to pay attention. He showed a raw, comedic edge that suggested his career could evolve into serious character acting. He was proving that he had the longevity to survive when the teenage looks eventually faded, if only he could keep his head above water. By 2010, Cody Longo was living the dream that millions of young men fantasize about. He was 22 years old. He had money in the bank. He had fame. He had access to the most exclusive parties in Los Angeles. He was driving fast cars and dating beautiful women. He was the prince of young Hollywood. But there is a dark side to achieving your dream so young, a shadow that grows in direct proportion to the brightness of the spotlight. When you are rewarded primarily for your image, you begin to fear that your true self is insufficient. In the late 2000s, the machinery of Hollywood was designed to extract value, not to nurture mental health. The concept of mental health awareness was in its infancy. There were no intimacy coordinators on set. There were no mental health days. If you were a young actor on a hit show, you were an asset, a line item on a budget. You were expected to work 12, 14, 16 hours a day. You were expected to be on at all times, charming to the press, gracious to the fans, and obedient to the producers. For Cody, who had always possessed a sensitive old soul disposition, this environment was a pressure cooker. The disconnect between the public persona, the confident, swaggering heartthrob who had it all figured out, and the private reality began to widen. He was a young man who felt things deeply, living in a city that valued superficiality above all else. He was a musician who wanted to write songs about pain and truth, working in an industry that wanted him to sing pop anthems about parties and summer love. He was an artist who wanted to explore the human condition, trapped in the role of a pin-up model. And lurking in the background, waiting for a moment of weakness, was the family curse that plagues so many artistic souls: the predisposition to addiction. Los Angeles is a city of functional addicts. In the entertainment industry, alcohol is not viewed as a drug. It is viewed as fuel. It is the champagne at the premiere. It is the beer at the wrap party. It is the expensive scotch at the meeting. It is the shot of whiskey to calm the nerves before a big scene. It is everywhere. For a young man with underlying anxiety and anxiety born from the pressure to maintain a perfect image, alcohol is a magical elixir. It works. At first, it turns down the volume of the noise in your head. It loosens the knot in your chest. It makes you feel as charming and confident as the characters you play on TV. It bridges the gap between who you are and who the world expects you to be. By the end of 2010, the view from the top of the Hollywood Hills was breathtaking, but the air was getting thin. Cody Longo had successfully transformed himself from the ambitious kid from Colorado into a verified industry commodity. He had the face, the resume, and the momentum of a star on the rise. Yet, the very machinery that had elevated him, the relentless schedules, the public scrutiny, and the culture of excess was beginning to vibrate with a dangerous intensity. As he stood on the threshold of his biggest role yet, the golden boy was about to find that the brightest lights cast the longest shadows, and the line between playing a troubled rock star and becoming one was far thinner than anyone realized. In the life cycle of every actor, there is often one role that becomes a second skin, a character so intimately aligned with the performer's own identity that the barrier between fiction and reality begins to dissolve. For Cody Longo, that role arrived in 2011, and it would define the next decade of his life, for better and for worse. The project was ambitious, risky, and relentlessly demanding. It was a daily drama called Hollywood Heights, produced for Nick at night. This was not a standard weekly sitcom or a procedural drama. It was an experiment in American television based on the wildly successful Mexican telenovela Alcanzar una estrella. The mandate for Hollywood Heights was grueling. It was designed to air 5 nights a week. In the ecosystem of television production, this is the equivalent of running a marathon at a sprinter's pace. A typical weekly drama shoots 1 episode over 8 to 10 days. Hollywood Heights was churning out content daily. This meant shooting 60 to 80 pages of script a day. To understand the brutality of this schedule, one must look at the cognitive load it required. Cody wasn't just showing up and looking pretty. He had to memorize dozens of pages of dialogue every single night. He was arriving on set at 5 a.m. while the Los Angeles sky was still inky black, performing for 14 hours straight, and leaving well after the sun had gone down, only to go home and study for the next day. It was an endurance sport that required cognitive athleticism. This level of exhaustion creates a specific physiological vulnerability. When the brain is fried and the body is aching, the need for a come-down becomes urgent. Alcohol stops being a party favor and starts becoming a necessary tool for decompressing. It becomes the only way to switch the brain off so sleep can happen. The plot centered on a young, aspiring singer named Laureen, who dreams of breaking into the music industry and falls in love with a superstar. Cody Longo was cast as the superstar, Eddie Duran. Eddie Duran was not merely a love interest, he was the sun around which the entire narrative universe orbited. Eddie was a 22-year-old rock icon facing the crushing pressures of fame, a cynical industry, and a manipulative romance, all while trying to maintain his artistic integrity. It was a role that required a specific, rare alchemy, musical legitimacy, leading man charisma, and a vulnerability that could make a teenage audience want to save him. When Cody stepped onto the set, the producers knew they had struck gold. He didn't just look the part, he understood the psychology of the character because he was living a parallel version of it. He brought a texture to the role that couldn't be taught in acting class. He brought the swagger of a man who knows he is talented, but also the haunting, quiet exhaustion of a man who is tired of being looked at. For the better part of a year, Cody lived inside the skin of Eddie Duran. The studio became his home. The cast and crew became his family. The sheer volume of work left little room for a personal life. His existence narrowed down to the soundstage, the recording booth, and the brief hours of sleep in between. In this pressure cooker, the golden boy thrived professionally. He was reliable, he was charismatic, he hit his marks. But psychically, the role was taking a toll. Playing a character who is constantly stressed, constantly managed, and constantly weary of fame reinforced those exact feelings in Cody himself. The lines were blurring. Was he tired because Eddie Duran was tired? Or was he tired because Cody Longo was burning the candle at both ends? The brilliance and the danger of Hollywood Heights was its meta-narrative. The show didn't just tell the story of a rock star, it created one. As Eddie Duran, Cody was performing songs on screen, but the producers and the record label realized they had a unique opportunity. They released the music in the real world credited to Cody Longo. In 2012, his single, She Said, was released. In the landscape of TV tie-in music, expectations are usually low. These songs are often cheesy, overproduced tracks, destined for the bargain bin. But She Said was different. It was a legitimate, polished pop anthem. It had a hook that burrowed into the brain. It had production value. And most importantly, it had Cody's voice. Raspy, soulful, and undeniably radio-ready. The song caught the wave of the zeitgeist perfectly. It cracked the Billboard charts. It is important to understand the scale of this musical victory. She Said didn't just chart. It competed with the titans of the industry. At its peak, the song sat at number 3 on the iTunes pop charts, breathing down the necks of global superstars like Justin Timberlake and Taylor Swift. This wasn't a vanity project funded by a studio. This was organic. It proved that Cody wasn't just an actor playing a singer. He was a musician who happened to act. He played the piano, the guitar, and wrote his own lyrics. For a brief moment, the industry didn't just see a pretty face. They saw a legitimate dual-threat artist who could command a stage as easily as he commanded a camera. Suddenly, the fantasy was real. The simulation had breached the real world. Cody wasn't just playing a musician who played sold-out shows. He was a musician playing sold-out shows. He was touring. He was recording. He was doing radio interviews where the DJs asked him about his music, not just his TV show. To the outside world, this was the apex of the American dream. He was young, rich, famous, and a double threat. He was driving fast cars down the Pacific Coast Highway. He was dating beautiful women. He had the world on a string. But inside the machine, the gears were beginning to grind against each other. The lifestyle of a young celebrity in Los Angeles is a landscape of infinite temptation, but it is also a landscape of profound isolation. You are surrounded by people, yet you are rarely seen. You are surrounded by yes men, assistants, promoters, hangers-on, whose paycheck depends on you staying happy or at least staying functional. For someone with a predisposition to addiction, this environment is not a playground. It is a killing field. Access is the currency of the city. When you are the star of a hit show and a charting musician, you don't hear the word no. You are invited to the parties in the Hollywood Hills where the alcohol flows like water and the drugs are laid out on glass tables like hors d'oeuvres. It is a culture that normalizes excess. If you drink until 4 a.m., but make your 6 a.m. call time, you aren't an alcoholic. You're a rock star. You're a legend. Cody was walking through this minefield without a map, and the explosions were getting closer. The first public sign that the pressure was causing structural damage to Cody's life came in 2013. It was the crack in the facade that let the darkness in. Cody was arrested in Los Angeles for driving under the influence. To understand the reaction to this event, we must look at the media landscape of 2013. This was the era of peak tabloid chaos. Justin Bieber was drag racing Lamborghinis. Lindsay Lohan was in and out of court. Amanda Bynes was spiraling on Twitter. In this context, a DUI by a young TV star was often dismissed by the public as a rite of passage. The narrative was almost pre-written. He's young, he's rich, he messed up, he's blowing off steam. Cody's public relations team managed the fallout efficiently. The machine went into damage control mode. He issued the standard apologies. He expressed regret. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation. He was ordered to attend alcohol education classes. The story cycled out of the news within a week. The industry, eager to keep the money train moving, forgave him instantly. But beneath the surface, the arrest wasn't just a mistake, it was a symptom. It was a flare sent up from a sinking ship. The DUI revealed that the alcohol wasn't just a social lubricant for Cody anymore. It wasn't just about having fun at a party. It was becoming a necessity. It was the medication he prescribed himself to manage the adrenaline dump after a 16-hour day. It was the way he quieted the old soul mind that wouldn't stop racing. It was the way he numbed the anxiety of feeling like an imposter in his own life. The court-mandated alcohol education classes were intended to be a wake-up call. But for many functioning alcoholics, they are simply a hurdle to be cleared. You attend the classes, you sign the papers, you say the right things, and then you go back to the life that requires the anesthesia. Despite the legal trouble, his career momentum carried him forward. He was cast in Days of Our Lives as Nicholas Alamain in 2011. This was a prestigious role in the soap opera world, signaling that he was transitioning from teen idol to serious adult actor. He filmed movies like Wildflower and Rich Boy, Rich Girl. He was working, he was functioning. But the high-functioning alcoholic is a precarious creature. They are building a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. They are expending immense amounts of energy just to appear normal, leaving them with no reserves when a crisis hits. In 2015, it seemed that Cody had finally found an anchor strong enough to hold him steady against the riptide of Hollywood. He married Stephanie Clark. Stephanie was not just a Hollywood hanger-on or a fan. She was a talented choreographer and dancer, a woman with her own discipline and drive. She was beautiful, grounded, and seemingly deeply in love with Cody. Together, they looked like the picture-perfect power couple of the Instagram age. They began to build a family. First came a daughter, Lila, then a son, Elijah, then another son, Noah. Cody embraced fatherhood with a ferocious, almost desperate intensity. If you looked at his social media during these years, you saw a man who was obsessed with his children. He posted about them constantly. He wrote captions that were long, emotional tributes to their innocence and his love for them. He posted videos of himself playing the piano with a toddler on his lap, passing down the gift of music just as he had discovered it in Littleton. He seemed to be pivoting away from the wild nights of Hollywood toward the domestic bliss of family life. He wanted to be a good man. He wanted to be a provider. He wanted to build a legacy that wasn't just about ratings or chart positions. He wanted to be the father he perhaps felt he needed. There was another side to Cody that the tabloids rarely printed, a side that makes his eventual collapse even more painful to witness. He possessed a genuine, almost frantic desire to help others. He didn't just hoard his wealth. He became deeply involved with the charity Live Loud, an organization dedicated to saving the arts in schools. Cody wasn't just a name on a donor list. He showed up. He visited hospitals. He spoke to kids who, like him, felt different or isolated. He mentored young musicians, telling them that music could save their lives, even as he was beginning to realize it couldn't save his own. This was the central paradox of Cody Longo, a man who could offer profound hope to strangers while slowly losing the ability to offer it to himself. But social media is a curated reality. It is a highlight reel. Instagram filters can hide the dark circles under the eyes, but they cannot hide the trembling of hands in the morning. They cannot hide the smell of liquor on the breath at 10 a.m. They cannot hide the arguments that happen when the camera is off. As his private life began to fracture, his digital life became a fortress of denial. On Instagram, Cody crafted an image of spiritual and familial perfection. He posted Bible verses, speaking of redemption and God's grace. He shared photos of Sunday services and smiling family outings. It was a desperate attempt to manifest a reality that was slipping away. It creates a chilling contrast in hindsight. The more chaotic his internal world became, the more perfect his online persona appeared. He was trying to convince the world and perhaps himself that the darkness wasn't winning. The disconnect between the public image of Cody Longo, the loving father, the talented musician, the working actor, and the private reality of his life was growing wider by the day. The alcohol was no longer a guest in his life. It was the master of the house. It was dictating his moods, his sleep, and his decisions. It was the third partner in his marriage. As the decade wore on, the teen idol roles began to dry up. This is a natural, albeit brutal, part of the Hollywood life cycle. The industry moves on to younger, fresher faces. The phone rings less. The auditions become harder to get. For an actor whose identity is tied to his fame, this cooling off period is existentially terrifying. Who is Eddie Duran when the show gets canceled? Who is Cody Longo when the fan mail stops coming? The existential dread fueled the addiction, and the addiction fueled the professional decline. It was a vicious cycle. He was drinking to cope with the stress of a stalling career, which in turn made him less reliable and less employable. As 2019 drew to a close, Cody Longo was a man living on the edge. He had a beautiful family, a nice home, and a resume that most actors would kill for. But inside, the structure was rotting. The year of the break was approaching. The protective bubble of his early fame had evaporated, and the demons were no longer whispering. They were screaming. The world was about to see what happens when the music stops. With the decade drawing to a close, The delicate balancing act Cody had maintained between his public image and his private demons began to falter. The high-functioning alcoholic can only defy gravity for so long before the weight of the addiction pulls everything down. As 2019 faded into 2020, the whispers about his instability were about to turn into shouts, and the private struggles that had been contained within the walls of his home were about to spill out into the unforgiving light of the legal system. The era of the heartthrob was ending. The era of the headline was about to begin. In the trajectory of every tragic Hollywood narrative, there is a specific moment where the slow, unseen erosion of a life suddenly manifests as a catastrophic landslide. For Cody Longo, that moment was the arrival of 2020. It is a year etched into the collective memory for its global trauma: the pandemic, the lockdowns, the silent cities. But for Cody, the external chaos of the world was merely a backdrop to a personal apocalypse that had been brewing for a decade. The protective seal of his early fame had worn off. The bad boy image that had served him so well on screen as Eddie Duran or Nicky Russo was no longer a costume he could take off at the end of the day. It had become a cage. The first blow came in January, in a location far removed from the glitz of Los Angeles or the quiet suburbs of Colorado. Clarksville, Tennessee, is a city defined by its proximity to the Fort Campbell military base, a place of order, discipline, and stark reality. It is not the kind of place where Hollywood scandals usually unfold, but it was here that Cody Longo's reputation was shattered beyond repair. The news broke with the kind of sordid details that end careers instantly. Cody was arrested and charged with sexual assault. The allegations were horrifying. The incident reportedly involved a 9-year-old girl and had occurred the previous year. The details of the legal process were humiliating. It wasn't just a rumor, there was an arrest warrant. He was booked into jail, and his mugshot, haggard, unshaven, eyes deadened, was plastered across the internet. The bond was set at $50,000. For a man who had once graced the covers of teen magazines as the ultimate dream date, this was the bottom. For the fans who still held a candle for the heartthrob of Hollywood Heights, this was not just a disappointment. It was a betrayal that felt physical. The cognitive dissonance was deafening. How could the man who sang romantic ballads, the man who posted doting photos of his own daughter, be accused of something so heinous? The legal machinery ground into gear. Cody's defense team went on the offensive, vehemently denying the most serious allegations. They painted a picture of a misunderstanding, of a celebrity target, but the damage was done. In the internet age, the accusation is often the verdict. The headlines were etched in digital stone. The golden boy was now associated with something dark and unforgivable. The case hung over him like a sword of Damocles for more than a year. It paralyzed his career. No casting director would touch him. No agent could pitch him. He was radioactively toxic. Eventually, in 2021, the legal saga came to a resolution that was legally convenient but morally ambiguous. A plea deal was struck. The serious felony charges, the ones that would have sent him to prison for decades and branded him a sex offender, were dropped. In exchange, Cody pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor assault charge. He was sentenced to probation. Legally, he was a free man. He wasn't a convicted sex offender. But in the court of public opinion, the stain was permanent. But the chaos of 2020 wasn't confined to courtrooms in Tennessee. It was bleeding into the sanctuary of his home. Addiction is a disease of isolation and escalation. As the external pressure mounted from the legal case, Cody's internal coping mechanism, alcohol, went into overdrive. The drinking ceased to be a way to have fun. It became a way to obliterate consciousness. It was a way to black out the shame, the fear, and the reality of his crumbling life. In November 2020, the police were called to the Longo residence. This time, the victim wasn't a stranger. It was his wife, Stephanie. The police report detailed a domestic dispute fueled by intoxication. Cody was accused of pushing Stephanie's face with his forearm. Stephanie chose not to press charges. This is a common, heartbreaking dynamic in families ravaged by addiction. The spouse is often trapped in a cycle of hope and fear, hoping the man she married will return, and fearing that the legal system will destroy the father of her children. She likely saw the sickness behind the eyes of the man pushing her. She was trying to save the family, even as the house was burning down. In the wake of these twin disasters, the sexual assault case and the domestic violence arrest, the Longos made a desperate, classic move. They attempted the geographical cure. This is a seductive myth in the world of addiction. It is the belief that if you just move to a new city, a new state, a new environment, the addiction will stay behind. It whispers, if I leave Los Angeles, I leave the demons. If I move to Texas, I become a new man. In 2021, they packed up their lives and moved nearly 1,400 miles east to Austin, Texas. On paper, Austin was the perfect sanctuary. It is a city that prides itself on being a haven for artists and musicians, yet it lacks the predatory transactional nature of Hollywood. It offered a slower pace, cheaper cost of living, and a chance for anonymity. Here, Cody wasn't Eddie Duran or the guy from the mugshot. He was just a dad in his 30s pushing a stroller. For a brief period, the cure seemed to take hold. The Longos settled into a domestic rhythm. Stephanie found a community within the local dance world, teaching and choreographing. Cody focused on his music, setting up a home studio. They were raising 3 children, Lila, Elijah, and Noah, under the vast Texas sky. To the neighbors, they were a beautiful, slightly bohemian family. But the tragedy of the geographical cure is that while you can change the scenery, you cannot outrun your own biochemistry. You can move the body, but the brain chemistry travels with you. The stress of the move, the lingering trauma of the legal battles, and the underlying untreated mental health struggles began to erode the fresh start. By the summer of 2022, the shadow had returned. The drinking, which had perhaps been moderated during the transition, ramped up with a vengeance. But this time, Cody didn't deny it. He looked in the mirror and saw the cliff edge approaching. In a move that demonstrated immense courage and a fierce desire to live, Cody checked himself into a rehabilitation facility. This was not a PR stunt. There were no cameras. There was no press release. This was a private medical intervention. His longtime manager and friend, Alex Gittleson, saw this final fight up close. Gittleson wasn't just an agent protecting 10%. He was a witness to the struggle. He later noted that shortly before his death, Cody wasn't a man who had given up. He was a man making plans. They were in talks for new acting roles. Cody was excited about releasing a new album. The comeback wasn't just a fantasy. The contracts were being drawn up. This makes the silence of that locked bedroom even more deafening. Cody died on the precipice of a new beginning. He didn't die because he didn't have a future. He died because the past, in the form of chemical dependency, refused to let him reach it. When he completed the program, the change was visible. The bloating that characterizes chronic alcoholism had vanished. His eyes were clear. He was writing music with a renewed vigor. He spoke about a comeback not to the teen idol fame of 2012, but to a sustainable career as a working actor and musician. He wanted to direct. He wanted to produce. He wanted to redeem his narrative. But recovery is fragile. The medical reality of alcoholism is that the brain's reward pathways are permanently altered. The neural grooves that demand ethanol are deep and ancient. Sometime in the winter of 2022, the relapse began. It is unlikely that it started with a binge. Relapses often start with a negotiation. I can have just one. I'm better now. I'm in Texas, not LA. I can handle it. But the kindling effect, a phenomenon where each subsequent withdrawal and relapse becomes more severe, meant that Cody's body could no longer handle the toxicity. The spiral was faster, steeper, and darker than before. We arrive at the first week of February 2023. The atmosphere in the Longo home had shifted from hope to dread. The relapse was active. For Stephanie Clark, this was a waking nightmare. Living with an addict in active addiction is a specific kind of trauma. It is a life of walking on eggshells, of scanning the eyes of your partner to gauge their sobriety, of hiding keys and pouring bottles down the sink. On Tuesday, February 7th, the communication began to fracture. By Wednesday, February 8th, it had severed completely. Stephanie was at work at a local dance studio. It was a normal Wednesday for the rest of the world, but for her, the silence from her husband's phone was deafening. She called him. It went to voicemail. She texted him, "Pick up. Please let me know you're okay." The messages remained delivered, but not read. There is a specific intuition that partners of addicts develop. They know the difference between busy silence and using silence. This silence felt heavy. It felt final. Consumed by a rising panic and unable to leave her students immediately, Stephanie made the call that marks the end of so many stories of addiction. She called the Austin Police Department. "I need a welfare check on my husband," she likely told the dispatcher. "He has a history. He isn't answering." It was the afternoon of February 8th, 2023. A police cruiser rolled down the quiet residential street in Austin. There were no sirens screaming. It was a routine check, a mundane procedural task for the officers. They walked up the driveway, past the artifacts of a young family, perhaps a bicycle on the lawn, a toy on the porch. They knocked on the front door. Silence. They knocked again, louder. "Police." "Cody." Still silence. The officers, sensing the gravity of the situation, perhaps seeing through a window or simply following protocol when a welfare check yields no response, decided to enter. The house was still. It wasn't chaotic. There were no signs of a struggle in the living room. The domestic stillness made the situation even more eerie. They moved through the house, checking rooms, the kitchen, the living area, the children's rooms. They finally reached the primary bedroom. The door was closed and locked. This detail, the locked door, is the most haunting architectural element of the tragedy. It represents the ultimate isolation of the addict. In his final hours, Cody Longo didn't want to be found. He didn't want to be saved. He wanted to be alone with his sickness. He had built a fortress around his addiction, culminating in a literal locked door between him and the people who loved him. The officers announced themselves again. Hearing nothing, they forced the barrier. The wood splintered with a violent crack, and the door swung open to reveal the devastation inside. The air in the room was heavy and stagnant, carrying the undeniable scent of death. Cody Longo was lying on the bed. He wasn't sleeping. To the trained eye of a first responder, the signs were immediate. There was no rise and fall of the chest. The skin was pale. The report would later note signs of decomposition, a devastating detail that confirmed he had not died moments before their arrival. He had been gone for some time. He had died alone in the dark, while the world outside continued to turn. Scattered around the bed were the instruments of his demise, empty alcohol bottles, not pills, not needles, just alcohol. The legal, socially acceptable poison that had slowly dismantled his life over a decade. The officers checked for a pulse, a formality. There was none. At 34 years old, the boy who had charmed millions as Eddie Duran, the prodigy from Littleton who could play piano by ear, was pronounced dead at the scene. The kicking in of the door shattered the physical barrier between Cody and the world, but it also broke the silence that had shrouded his final struggle. The discovery of his body in that dim, alcohol-scented room was the grim conclusion to a fight that had been waged in secret for years. But as the initial shock of the police raid faded, the slow bureaucratic work of the medical examiners began. The question was no longer is he gone, but why? The answer, when it finally emerged from the labs months later, would strip away the tabloid speculation to reveal the stark, biological reality of what happens when a human body is pushed past its breaking point. When the police tape was finally removed from the door of the Longo residence in Austin, the immediate crisis had passed, but the agony of the unknown had just begun. The body of Cody Longo was transported to the Travis County Medical Examiner's office, a sterile bureaucratic facility that stands in stark contrast to the chaotic emotional reality of death. For Stephanie Clark and the shattered remnants of the Longo family, the period following the February 8, 2023, was a time of suspended animation. In the modern age of instant information, we expect answers immediately. We expect a headline to explain the why within hours. But forensic pathology operates on a different timeline. For 4 long months, there was silence. The rumor mill, however, was not silent. In the vacuum of official information, speculation ran rampant on social media and in the comment sections of celebrity news sites. Was it suicide? The locked door suggested a desire for finality. Was it fentanyl? The opioid crisis was claiming thousands of lives across Texas, and accidental overdoses were common. Was it foul play? Stephanie had to navigate this storm of conjecture while trying to explain the unexplainable to 3 young children. Lila, Elijah, and Noah were too young to understand the nuance of addiction or the physiology of liver failure. They only knew that Daddy wasn't coming out of the room, and then Daddy was gone forever. It wasn't until June 2023 that the medical examiner finally released the autopsy report. The document was clinical, cold, and definitive. It stripped away the melodrama of Hollywood theories and replaced them with a stark biological reality. The manner of death was ruled natural. To the layperson, seeing the word natural attached to the death of a 34-year-old man found surrounded by liquor bottles feels like a contradiction. How can self-destruction be natural? But in the language of pathology, natural simply means there was no external agent of death, no bullet, no noose, no poison administered by another hand. The specific cause of death was chronic ethanol abuse. It is a phrase that carries a terrifying weight. It implies a tragedy not of a single moment, but of 1,000 moments. The autopsy revealed that Cody's body had not been overwhelmed by a sudden, massive spike in toxicity. Rather, it had simply reached its expiration date. The human body is resilient, but it is not invincible. For years, Cody's liver had been processing high volumes of toxin. Over time, the cellular damage accumulates, the liver scars, the heart muscle weakens, and the body's ability to filter blood collapses. The report noted that his blood alcohol concentration at the time of death was 0.19%. This number tells a devastating story. The legal driving limit in the United States is 0.08%. A BAC of 0.19% is high. It represents significant intoxication. For a non-drinker, it would induce stupor or blackouts. But for a chronic alcoholic with a decade of heavy tolerance, 0.19% is not necessarily a lethal dose on its own. Many alcoholics function at this level daily. The tragedy, therefore, was not that he drank too much that day, but that he had been drinking too much every day for years. The alcohol had eroded his physiology from the inside out. Cody Longo didn't die because he overdosed in a dramatic flare of rock star excess. He died because his body, exhausted by the relentless work of processing poison, simply stopped. The machine quit. It was the physical manifestation of the quiet exhaustion he had carried since his days on the set of Hollywood Heights. In the wake of the report, Stephanie Clark released a statement. In the world of celebrity deaths, these statements are often drafted by publicists, sanitized, generic expressions of grief. But Stephanie's words felt raw, defensive, and deeply human. "Cody was our whole world," she wrote. "The kids and I are shattered and beyond devastated. He was the best dad." It is a statement that many outsiders found difficult to reconcile. The internet is a place of binary judgment. Critics looked at the mugshots, the domestic violence report from 2020, and the circumstances of his death, and scoffed. How can a man who drank himself to death in a locked room be the best dad? But this cognitive dissonance is the specific heavy burden of those who love addicts. Stephanie wasn't lying. She was testifying to the duality of the man she married. She knew Cody, who sat at the piano with Lila on his lap, teaching her melodies by ear, his eyes lighting up with the same wonder he had felt in Littleton. She knew the Cody who was generous to a fault, who was affectionate, who cried when he watched movies, and who was fiercely loyal to his friends. But she also knew the other Cody, the one hijacked by the disease. Addiction splits a person in two. There is the human being, and there is the addict. The human being loved his children more than life itself. The addict loved the bottle more than the human being. Stephanie's statement was an act of defiance. She was refusing to let the addict define the entire legacy of the man. She was fighting to preserve the memory of the father for her children, to ensure that when they grew up, they remembered the music and the love, not just the locked door and the silence. The reaction from the entertainment industry was predictably muted. Hollywood is a town that loves a comeback story, but it is uncomfortable with a tragedy that feels avoidable. There were tributes, of course. Brittany Underwood, his co-star and on-screen love interest from Hollywood Heights, expressed her shock and sorrow. Fan accounts circulated old clips of him singing "She Said" in 2012, freezing him in amber as the handsome, brooding rock star. But beneath the RIP tweets, there was a darker, unspoken acknowledgement. Cody Longo was a casualty of a system that is designed to consume. The teen idol industrial complex of the late 2000s offered young men the world. It gave them money, access, and adoration before their frontal lobes were fully developed. It placed them in high-pressure environments, working 16-hour days, and expected them to be role models. But it provided no roadmap for what happens when the show ends. When Cody stumbled, when the DUI happened, when the bad boy image became too real, the industry didn't pause to help him up. It didn't offer extensive rehab or mental health support. It simply cast someone else. There is always another handsome boy from Colorado waiting off the bus. Cody was left to navigate the transition from star to civilian alone, and like so many before him, he found that the silence of anonymity was louder than the applause. Cody Longo is buried now. The autopsy report is filed. The police case is closed. But what remains is the haunting question of what if? His story is a tragedy of proximity. He was always so close. He was close to superstardom, but the show was canceled. He was close to a sustainable music career, but the momentum faded. He was close to sobriety in 2022, but the relapse caught him. He was close to redemption, but time ran out. His legacy is complicated. It is not a clean, heroic story. We cannot whitewash the allegations of 2020 or the pain he caused his family. Those scars are real, but neither can we dismiss him simply as a troubled star or a statistic. He was a musician of genuine raw talent who heard music in the air before he could read. He was an actor who could command a scene with a look. He was a father who wanted to be better, who fought, however imperfectly, to stay above water. The house in Austin is quiet now. The empty bottles have been cleared away. But the silence that Cody left behind is heavy. It serves as a somber warning about the fragility of talent and the corrosive power of untreated mental health struggles. It reminds us that fame is not a shield against darkness. Often, it is a magnifying glass that focuses the heat until the subject burns. Cody Longo spent his life chasing the music in his head, the perfect melody, the perfect scene, the perfect high. He wanted to be heard. He wanted to be seen. In his final moments in that locked room in Texas, he found the only thing the noise of Hollywood could never give him: absolute, terrifying stillness. The song is unfinished. The piano lid is closed. And the golden boy of Littleton has finally gone to sleep.